center line. Go ahead and hold those brakes. Hold back pressure in the elevator. Slowly advance that throttle. Max RPM. Away we go.
My name's Jerry, and this is Sam, my 1956 Cessna 172. Now, Sam may not be the newest, and definitely not the fastest, but he's a ton of fun to fly, and we spend a lot of time exploring the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. So, come along and join the fun on Cessna 42 Alpha. Morning everyone, it is a cold one out here at the Warrenton Fauquier Airport in Midland, Virginia, where today I'm going to introduce you to Sam and walk you through some of the differences between a very early 172 like this and the more modern Skyhawks you're more likely to encounter and fly today. Now, 1956 was the very first year of production of the 172, and if you're keeping count, Sam here was actually the 1,142nd 172 ever built, rolling off the Wichita assembly line in October of that year. The 172 started off life actually as the Cessna 170, a tail dragger aircraft with that iconic round rudder and round elevator. Now, in late 1954, the engineers at Cessna were trying to figure out how they could improve performance of the 170. And one of the ideas they came up with was replacing that iconic round tail with a square tail, similar to the tail they were already using on the Cessna 180, with the idea that it would improve elevator performance. They went ahead and put together a prototype of that square-tailed 170, which they were going to call the 170C model. But before they took the 170C to production, somebody said, hey, what if we put a nose wheel on that plane? And the 172 was essentially born. So early 172s like this are basically just Cessna 170s with a nose wheel instead of a tail wheel. Same engine, same fuselage, same wing, pretty much the same everything except for that landing gear and a squared off tail instead of the rounded tail. In fact, for the first few years of production, early 172s like this were actually manufactured under the Cessna 170 type certificate. Don't worry, the 172 eventually got its own type certificate a few years later. Now, one of the questions I get a lot is, what model of 172 is Sam? Is it a 172A model or a 172B? And the answer is, it's just a 172, period. Later years, as Cessna started making tweaks to the airframe and engine, they started putting letters after 172 to differentiate those newer versions from what came before. But for the first 4 years of production, 172s like this were just plain old 172s. In fact, technically speaking, Sam here isn't even a Skyhawk. Cessna didn't start marketing 172s as Skyhawks until 1961. And even then, it was a name they were only applying to the deluxe version of 172. It wouldn't be until 1976 that Cessna started applying the name Skyhawk to all 172s. So if Sam here isn't a Skyhawk, what is he? Well, page 1 of Sam's owner's manual, and it is an owner's manual. He was built back before they were putting together big, thick pilot operating handbooks. Page 1 of Sam's owner's manual welcomes you to your brand new Cessna 172 business liner. It's a name that didn't really stick, but I do enjoy telling folks that I'm a business liner pilot. That said, when you hear me talking on the radio, I'm still going to use the call sign Skyhawk. Because while pretty much everybody listening on the radio knows that a Skyhawk is a Cessna 172, and most folks just aren't nerdy enough to know the difference. But hey, congratulations! You're now among those select nerdy few. Now let's head out to the ramp and take a closer look at Sam. Alright, so I'm just going to start off first by noting that Sam is pretty much a stock airplane. Other than some updated radios and a few other tweaks like an electronic fuel flow sensor, Sam is pretty much in the exact same configuration that he was when he left the Wichita assembly line. No upgraded motor, no stole kit, no glass panel, just a straight stock 1956 172. All right, so what are some of the differences between these very early 172s and the more modern versions you're more likely to encounter and fly today? Well, we'll start off back here with probably the most obvious, the rear window. Where is it? Well, obviously there isn't a rear window on SAM. Cessna didn't start putting rear windows in the 172 until 1963. It was an innovation they called OmniVision. But before that, all 172s had these straight tails here. It's a design that you'll sometimes hear referred to as the fastback. Now, is it really any faster? That's not really been my experience. SAM's actually a little bit slower than the 172 N and P models I flew before I purchased them, but I suspect that's probably got more to do with the fact he only has 145 horsepower under the cowling than anything else. Now, the other big difference about these first year 172s or early 172s and their more modern cousins are this big square tail back here. In 1960, Cessna introduced what they called the 172A model with that swept back tail that they're still producing today. It's the look that everybody's familiar with when they think about a Skyhawk. They did it to make the planes look more modern and just seem faster, which, mission accomplished. The planes do look a little bit better. But that said, that design change did come with a performance cost. That swept back tail has a smaller rudder, which means you have less rudder authority at slower speeds. And that's one thing I really love about SAM here, is you don't lack for rudder authority on short final, which makes crosswind landings that much easier, especially when you're low and slow coming in on short and soft fields. It's this big rudder that actually makes a lot of these early 172s prime targets for conversion to tailwheel, essentially taking them back to their roots and turning them back into Cessna 170s. You'll encounter tailwheel conversions of the 172 from time to time today. A lot of people actually confuse them for early model Cessna 180s, but I assure you, a Cessna 180, this is not. I would personally love to convert SAM to a tailwheel myself. I just need to win the lottery first because it sure ain't cheap. Now, one last thing to point out while we're back here is the baggage door, or more specifically, the complete lack of a baggage door. If you want to get in and out of the baggage compartment, you've got to go into the cabin and through the back seat. It's not exactly the most convenient way to get your stuff in and out of the plane, but hey, it works. All right, coming around to the side of the plane here, these aren't big air horns. This is actually SAM's vacuum system right here. Instead of having a vacuum pump under the cowling, it relies on air flowing through these Venturi tubes to power the gyros that run the attitude and heading indicators. Now, on the plus side, this is a very simple system and it's very reliable. I never have to worry about having a vacuum pump failure. Also, it saves me a little bit of weight. Without that big heavy vacuum pump under the cowling, I get about 20 more pounds of useful load. On the negative side, of course, this isn't generating suction unless you're moving, and typically moving pretty fast, which means I can't set the heading indicator on the ground. Well, I can, it's just not going to be any accurate when I take off. And my attitude indicator is going to be completely unreliable until I've been airborne for a minute or two. You'll also notice that SAM is a little bit bow-legged on these big, tall spring steel gear legs. This landing gear is something that Cessna initially marketed as its Land-O-Matic gear, with the theory being that tricycle configuration was so simple to land, the plane essentially landed itself. And while it's certainly true that a tricycle gear plane is definitely a lot easier to land than a tailwheel plane, I must be doing something wrong because I've not gotten SAM to land himself even once. Now, these gear legs are a few inches taller than you'll find on more modern 172s, which gives you a bit of a different sight picture in the cockpit. That can take a little getting used to. Before I bought SAM, I flew only 172 N and P models on the lower legs. And my first few landings in these, well, they were a little rough. I actually found myself on the runway a little bit sooner than I had expected. Or at least I'll blame my awful landings on the higher gear legs. And coming around to the side of the cowling here, we have this big access panel, which gives you a great view of everything going on inside. I really appreciate this when I'm doing my pre-flight inspections. Now, this is where Sam's mighty 145 horsepower 0300 engine lives. These 6-cylinder Continental engines were the mainstay of the 172 fleet up until 1968, when Cessna made the switch to 4-cylinder Lycomings, which is what they're still using today. Personally, I find the 145 horsepower a little anemic on hot, humid days when compared to the 160 and 180 horsepower engines most Skyhawks are flying around with today. Now, that being said, I find I can still pretty much get in and out of wherever I want to, as long as I pay close attention to density, altitude, and I'm realistic about the performance limitations of the airplane. On the plus side, these 6 cylinders, they really sound great compared to a 4-cylinder engine, and they give you a slightly higher degree of redundancy. I've talked to pilots who swear they were flying around in their 0300 engines with a bum cylinder and never even knew the difference. I'm not sure I'd want to try that theory out myself, but good to know. On the negative side, having 6 cylinders definitely means you are not the most fuel efficient machine out there, and I typically find myself burning between 7 to 7.5 gallons in cruise, even a little more than that in cold winter days when the density altitude is very, very low and the engine's really sucking up a lot of gas. All right, let's go take a look inside the cockpit. Now, probably my most favorite feature of all of these older model 172s is right here on the floor between the pilot and co-pilot seat, and that's your manual flaps. Instead of having an electronic flap switch up here on the panel, Sam has this big manual lever down here on the floor, which will give you 10, 20, 30, and a full 40 degrees of flaps. And 40 degrees of flaps is absolutely awesome when you're dropping over trees on a short field landing. Now, Cessna went to all electronic flaps in 1965 in an effort to make their planes seem more modern. But for me, I personally love the manual flaps for a few reasons. First of all, you have instantaneous input. When I dial in 10 degrees of flaps, I've got 10 degrees of flaps. I don't have to wait for a motor to move that to my selected position. Second of all, it's a lot more reliable. You don't have to worry about motors malfunctioning, forcing you to get stuck with full flaps and no way out of it. When I want to dump flaps, I just dump the flaps. Third, if I have a full electrical failure in the plane for some reason, I still have full flap control, which is a great peace of mind and good to know that I have all of my flight controls available to me in the event of some sort of electrical failure. But beyond that, for me, the manual flaps here are just a heck of a lot more fun to use. Now, if you're looking at the panel to try and figure out how much fuel you have left, good luck. That's because there are no fuel gauges there. Instead, the fuel gauges are up here in the root of each wing. You've got a 21-gallon tank on either side with 18.5 usable, giving you a total of 37 gallons of usable fuel in the plane. Depending on your cruise power settings, that'll give you about 4.5 hours of flying time, if your bladder can last that long. Mine usually can't. Okay, looking at the panel itself here, you'll notice a few things are different. First of all, the panel itself is a lot lower than what you'll find in more modern 172s. It gives you a great view looking out the front window here, and combined with the higher gear legs, it gives you a slightly different sight picture that I personally like a whole lot. The other thing you'll notice is Sam is all steam gauges. I've flown planes with both steam and glass panels, and I have to say, I really appreciate the simplicity of the big round dials. There's just not a whole lot to get distracted by here. And when you combine the steam gauges with my ADS-B receiver there and ForeFlight over on my iPad here, well, I really have all of the information I need to maintain solid situational awareness on long VFR flights and still have a great time flying the airplane. The other thing you'll notice is the panel layout is pretty different. Instead of having a center stack of radios right here and a central 6-pack of instruments located right in front of the pilot here, you don't have a 6-pack of instruments. Instead, the instruments are kind of spread out all across the panel. Your radios are on the bottom down here, and your transponder is actually over here to the left of the pilot's yoke. It takes a little getting used to, figuring out where to look, but like anything, once you get used to it, it's really not that big a deal. One last thing to point out while we're in here is the airspeed indicator, which is in miles per hour, not knots. Up until 1969, miles per hour was actually the standard in general aviation until in 1969, the FAA decided to go ahead and make the switch to knots. All of Sam's reference speeds in his owner's manual are in miles per hour, and depending on my cruise setting, Sam will typically give me between 115 to 125 miles an hour in cruise. Now, with all of that said, how does Sam fly compared to his more modern relatives? Well, I already talked about that big rudder in back, giving you a lot more rudder authority, which is fantastic. The manual flaps, from my perspective, just can't be beat, and the lower panel and higher gear legs do give you that different sight picture that take a little bit of getting used to, but not much. But beyond that, Sam pretty much flies like any other Cessna 172. All right, now speaking of flying, what do you say we take Sam for a couple of laps around the pattern here at the Warrenton Fauquier Airport?
Warrenton Fauquier Airport.
Automated weather observation 1539er. Zulu weather wind 260 at 6 visibility 10. Clear below 12,000. Temperature 0 Celsius. Dew point -12. Altimeter 3024.
All right, it's going to be runway 33 with a pretty much direct crosswind. Taxi clearance don't need it. Taxi brief, well, we're just going to taxi to runway 33 and we'll test the brakes. And the brakes are good. So a couple things about Sam here. First off, instead of an alternator, he's got an old school generator. And that means that we have to be really careful about electrical power usage during ground operations, simply because he's really not generating power to the battery unless we are making 1600 RPM or better. But just something to be aware of, especially on cold mornings like this. We're pretty much drawing directly from the battery. We're really not putting any power out there. Once we take off, that'll get rectified, but it's just the quirk of the generator. Warrenton traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha is taxiing to runway 33 from the hangars, Warrenton. Another thing about Sam here too is carb heat. You'll notice when I do the run-up, I'm going to leave the carb heat on until we're ready for takeoff. That's because with these old Continentals, carb ice is a thing. I had flown only 172 N and P models before I bought Sam with their Lycoming engines. And I just thought that carb ice was something you read about in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. It wasn't something that really happened anymore. Well, it sure is a thing with these old Continental engines. About 4 weeks after I bought Sam, I was at 6,500 feet over the Blue Ridge on a gorgeous sunny day in May. Beautiful temperatures, probably low 80s. And the engine power started to roll back suddenly on me. So I increased the throttle. That made the problem worse. I increased the mixture. That made the problem worse still. So I pulled the carb heat on and left that on, and after about a minute, things cleared up and we were right back to normal. But ever since then, I take carb heat very seriously with this plane. Carb ice is a thing, especially on cold mornings when you're doing the run-ups and ground operations and operating below cruise power. Really, anytime I'm operating below cruise power, I'm going to err on the side of caution and use that carb heat. One last thing to note about Sam here is the mixture knob over here. It is not the newer style vernier style knob where you can dial in the mixture setting that you're looking for precisely. This is an old school push-pull knob with kind of a rudimentary locking mechanism on it. That means you have to be really, really careful when you're making adjustments to the mixture. You've got to be very slow and very deliberate. Otherwise, you might find yourself accidentally cutting off gas to the engine. Ask me how I know. And we're pretty much ready to take off now. Don't see any traffic on ADSB here. I'm not hearing anything on the radio. We'll go ahead and taxi to 33 and hold short. Make sure we get a good view of what's coming in on final here. There are a few Cubs here that don't have radios in them, so we always want to make sure we're giving a good clearing look before we taxi onto the runway. We're just going to do a normal takeoff here for our first takeoff. Before we get onto the runway, we're going to make sure our landing light is on. Hope don't need it. Doors and windows are closed and locked. Flaps are at 0. Trim is set for takeoff. Carb heat is cold. We're going to plug the iPad in here. And the mixture 4-inch. Alright, normal takeoff. We'll get onto the runway. We'll go full throttle. We will rotate at 60. And we'll climb at about 80 to 90. And pattern height here at, pattern altitude here, Warrington Fock here, 1,300. Warrington traffic, Skyhawks 7042 Alpha is taking runway 33, remaining in the pattern, Warrington. Taxi to the very end. I like to give myself all of the runway, even though we get 5,000 feet of it here. Alright, we are lined up. Mixture's full, carb heat's cold, trim set for takeoff. Heels to the floor, on the rudders, off the brakes. We will advance the throttle slowly and carefully. Bit on center line. Airspeed's alive, battery is charging, we've got oil pressure, we've got oil temperature, we are well above 60. We'll go ahead and rotate. A little bit of a crosswind. There we go. And we're going to turn that cabin heat on because it is cold. Little nose down trim. A little bumpy up here. Not bad though. Winds are much worse yesterday. Didn't come out. Warrington traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha, left crosswind, runway 33, Warrington.
Cutting traffic, Pilatus 434 Lima Romeo is 10 miles to the south, won't be a straight in for 34, Carroll County.
Warrington traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha, left downwind 33, full stop, Warrington.
Center of traffic, Skyhawk 62530 is 5 miles to the east. We'll be overflying the field at 2000 to circle around on the west side.
Carroll County traffic, Pilatus 434 Lima Romeo is a 9-mile final, runway 34, Carroll County.
Hanover traffic, 9525 Victor is about 3 miles to the west, and 45 left down, runway 34, Hanover traffic.
That's just us.
Warrington traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha, left base runway 33, full stop, Warrington. Warrington traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha, short final 33, full stop, Warrington.
Hanover County traffic, Pilatus 434 Lima Romeo is a 7-mile final, 34, Carroll County.
Warrington traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha is clear of the runway, taxiing back to runway 33, Warrington.
Alright, for our next one here, we're going to do a combination soft field, short field, because, well, most short fields are also soft fields. Alright, landing light is on. Doors and windows closed and locked. Flaps are set to 10 for this. Trim is set for takeoff. Carb heat is cold. It's your full rich. Apply full back pressure on the elevator when we get onto the runway. Full throttle, take off with the tail low, basically pop a wheelie down the runway. We're going to remain in ground effect till we get to about 60. Then after that, once we are clear of obstacles, we'll go ahead and retract the flaps and again climb it at about 80 to 90.
Warrington traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha is taking runway 33, remaining in the pattern, Warrington.
Line up that center line. Go ahead and hold those brakes. Hold back pressure in the elevator. Slowly advance that throttle. Max RPM. Away we go. And we're airborne. Well, we're pretty much clear of the obstacles already. Pump those flaps. Both of those now trim.
Warrenton traffic, Skyhawks 7042 Alpha, left crosswind, runway 33, Warrenton. Warrenton traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha, left downwind, 33, full stop, Warrenton.
Carroll County, Malibu Creek, Meridian 3250.
Warrenton traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha, left base 33, full stop, Warrenton. Warrenton traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha, short final 33, full stop, Warrenton.
And it's traffic, 13 on the flap is 10 miles east of the field, and the flap is midfield 2,000 east of west. Front row traffic, Cherokee 7019 Romeo taxiing from the north hangars to 334 departure.
Watch out for those last second gusts, they'll get you.
Warrenton traffic, Skyhawk 7042 Alpha is clear of the runway, Warrenton.
All right, well, that's all for today. I'm really looking forward to bringing you along on some new adventures as we explore the mountains, rivers, lakes, and bays that this region has to offer, while we check out some of the smaller airports and grass strips along the way. Thanks for coming along. It was great having you, and we'll see you next time.